So I'm going to start to share my screen now, and we'll start sort of my presentation. I think we're going to sort of have pauses for questions at various stages through the presentation. So I would be really excited to have lots of questions about the farming system that we are building here at Overbury. So I hope this is, you can see this okay. This is a little bit about myself, me. I didn't come from a farming family. My parents were teachers, but I started the love of farming with my godfather, milking cows in Bedfordshire, which is maybe 3 hours away from my hometown of Bristol. I used to have a holiday in the summer and a holiday in the winter with him, and I haven't wanted to really do any other career. And I've been very fortunate managing Overbury here to be able to move the farm into a regenerative farming system. And as a result of that, we've won some awards along the way and being recognised for the work that we're doing in sustainability, environmental work, and also into sort of food production as well, and the innovations that we are going to talk about a little bit today. So the farm is a very mixed farm. We're about an hour south of Birmingham and about 2 hours west of London. It's a very mixed and varied farm. It's about 1,600 hectares. It goes to 300 meters above sea level down to about 30 meters. So it's all south facing, but it's quite steep. The soil on the top of the hill is very thin. We have what we call Cotswold brash soil, which has a pH of over 8. So nutrient lockup is a bit of a challenge. We have large stones up there as well, sort of this sort of size of a dinner plate. It's very free draining, but it does drought out quite a lot. And we have some sand over gravel, and then we have what we call Evesham series clay, which can get very wet. It's under drained, but it's very productive soil if we can manage that water. And water management is something that I will talk a lot about, because to me that underpins our farming system. We either have too much water or we have not enough water. We get 700 mil of rain every year, and we're combining about 900 hectares. Half of that area will be winter wheat, and then we have break crops of winter oilseed rape, of peas and beans, linseed, quinoa. We've tried soybeans in the past, and we also grow winter and spring malting barley as well. We let a little bit of land for vegetables. That's field scale vegetables, hand-picked peas, dwarf French beans, and a few salad onions as well. We've got a little bit of irrigation on 5 extraction sites on the farm, which are an historic license from when we did sand and gravel extraction here, for the cleaning of that product before it was sold. And we have 900 ewes that lamb outdoors on our permanent pasture. We've got about 300 hectares of permanent pasture. We have temporary grass lays, and we have woodland as well that makes up the balance of that 1,600 hectares. We are a leaf demonstration farm. Leaf is linking environment and farming, and this wheel here is the integrated farm management wheel, which I'll show you the up-to-date version of that shortly. But that underpins a lot of how we manage the farm, and how all of the decisions are based around certain aspects of this integrated farm management wheel. We have 5 full-time employees, and for the last 2 years we have had a student from the local agricultural college. The average age of the farmer is getting older and older, so we feel it's important to be able to encourage the next generation of farmers to have some good experiences. Farming has some massive challenges at the moment, and this slide is already out of date as of the sad news coming from Ukraine today. And our thoughts and prayers are with those people at the moment. But in terms of fuel shortages, energy prices, labour shortages here in the UK, we have had some challenges in terms of distribution, of taking grain from our farms, and bringing products to the farms. And it has been a real challenge. The pig industry, the poultry industry are really in turmoil here in the UK at the moment. And one thing that is massively affecting us is the price of nitrogen fertilizer. And probably with today's news, this graph is already wildly out of date, but the impact that fertilizer has on our profitability and our ability to produce food, but also our carbon footprint, is really, really huge. Our nitrogen fertilizer accounts for over 50% of the carbon footprint of us at Overbury, followed by diesel and energy, electricity, and then the pesticides are actually quite a small part of that. But nitrogen obviously drives a lot of yield. So one of the things we're trying to do in our system is to save the nitrogen that is in the soil and plant leguminous crops to try and increase the amount of free nitrogen that we can get and utilize with our crops. We're also faced with some huge climatic changes as well. This is the picture on the left here is Chipsbury Abbey, when this photograph was taken in 2007 from the air. The Abbey is about 1,000 years old. And what amazes me is that back in those days, they knew exactly where we should be building houses and property and cathedrals and abbeys, and all the modern houses that surround it are underwater, but the Abbey remains dry. And then this is a field of our sand and gravel land in the spring of 2020. This was in May, when we had a really, really dry spring, and our crops were really, really suffering. So, as I said in the introduction, water management is really crucial. I've just got some statistics here in terms of some records. The wettest UK day ever recorded was in October 2020. There were 240 mil recorded in a day. May 2020 was the driest and the sunniest ever recorded. February 2020, so a couple of months earlier, was the wettest February since 1766. December 2019, the highest recorded temperature of 18.7 degrees. And February 2019 was the highest ever February winter record of 21.2 degrees. So we have some huge challenges as farmers trying to grow food sustainably with this increase in the pressures that we're getting from our climate. So what have we been doing at Overbury? Well, we switched in 2013 to a regenerative system, and I just want to talk through some of the benefits that is bringing to our farming system now. But I thought it would be helpful because a lot of people ask me about regenerative agriculture and what does it mean? And there's a lot of discussion about how we should call it, what we should call it, and is regenerative agriculture the right description for what we do? So for me, it's a system of farming principles and practices that increase biodiversity, enriches our soils, improves our water, and enhances our ecosystem services, as well as enabling climate-friendly food production. And that bit to me is really, really important because there is a lot of talk here in the UK about rewilding and planting trees on productive farming land. We've all got areas of the farm that are not so good, that are the little wet corners, the areas that the combine or the sprayer can't reverse into with a wide boom, and those areas could be planted. But actually, we still need to produce food for the 9.5 billion people. And if we can do it with regenerative agriculture, then we are also increasing our biodiversity and our wildlife at the same time. And to me, that's really important. And the Paris Climate Accord in 2015 talked about regenerative agriculture in their 4 per 1,000 initiative. And this is calling for soils to draw down carbon from the air and store it in our soils. And I'll show you some graphs later on about how we're doing that here at Overbury. So just going back just to talk about LEAF for a brief second, this is our integrated farm management wheel. And working to inspire and enable sustainable farming solutions. that help our environment and our water. And all of these aspects of the wheel here are all interlinked. It's sort of like the spokes in a bicycle wheel, and how they all interlink and they're all interpinned with each other. But with our regenerative hat on, we'll be talking a lot about soil management and energy efficiency, water management, landscape and nature conservation, really important aspects of our farming business here. To me, though, I did my Nuffield Farming Scholarship in 2013, and my topic was breaking the wheat yield plateau in the UK. And I thought I would go around the world and find a magic bullet, some new fungicides, some new genetics, or some very old genetics which have been locked away in a vault somewhere that we can use. But I came back, having visited New Zealand and Mexico, North and South America, and Ireland, that actually we've been messing around with our soils too much. We've been over-cultivating them. We've been putting pesticides and fertilizers on, which have eroded our soil organic matter. And signs and scenes like this are all too common, not quite to this degree. This was Oklahoma in the 1930s after the Dust Bowl. It's quite a famous picture, but I visited Oklahoma, and that was where I had my light bulb moment about how we can improve our soil and our farming systems. So this was two fields on identical soil types, managed very differently for 20 years. The field on the left-hand side, as I look, I hope you can see that, the darker soil, lots of organic matter in the background, straw was being retained, it was open, it was friable, it smelt nice, it was alive with worms and insects. And we just had 2 inches of rain just shortly before this photograph, and that rain had infiltrated into that soil. And that farmer had a chance to plant a crop on that land. His neighbour next to him was a very traditional practice of when the combine headers had been through, that you would go and deep rip the field, cultivate it all up, and that broke the soil structure, and it had compacted in the surface. So when it rained, that water just sat on the top. It couldn't infiltrate into the field. And in 110 Fahrenheit temperatures and a windy day, that water disappeared. And for me, this is about a summary, if you like, of where we need to go. It's about our soil and it's about our water. And I've also visited the Noble Foundation there, named after Lloyd Noble, who found oil in Oklahoma in 1913. And he was an innovator. He was a proper pioneer in that time, and he said back then that the land must continue to provide our food, our clothing and our shelter long after the oil has gone. And to me, again, that is an incredible foresight. Here we are over 100 years later, and we are in that predicament now. We must be able to produce our food, shelter and clothing with less oil or with no oil. So we have a huge challenge. But the soil is actually there to help us. It is incredibly versatile, and it provides an awful lot of the benefits that we need from food, climate, water, nature, carbon and nutrients. So soil is something that we're going to talk about in a bit more detail. Frederick, are there any questions if I just have a brief pause now?
Ja, I will have an ask. Nogle spørgsmål, opklarende noget, som vi skal høre ind til. Jeg tror, I er helt optaget. Ja. Nope, we are all good.
Okay, fantastic. So, regenerative agriculture, I don't need to dwell on this for very long at all, because you guys are on this all over it. So minimize our soil disturbance, keeping our soil covered. We need long and diverse crop rotations, and ideally we could do with getting some livestock integrated onto those arable fields. And I want to just give you a few examples about where we've taken this journey to and where we've come from. So this was us in 2007, 2009, 2011, various different cultivation strategies. I came to Overbury in 2003 when we were still ploughing everything, working it all down, very traditional, Didn't really see anything wrong with it. We still had problems with grass weeds, black grass. We were having to put more and more fertilizer on, put more and more sprays on, and it was costing us more and more money. So the decision to move to a more regenerative farming system was an economic one in the start, about how can we reduce our costs of production. Wheat at that time was £100 a tonne, even less actually, 80 to 100, and our costs were starting to rise up, and that is still very, very true today. In fact, potentially even more so with the volatility that we're seeing. So back then, this was costing us on our plough-based system £169 per hectare to establish a crop of wheat. We brought that down a little bit over the years by buying slightly wider drills, by doing a little bit less cultivation here and there, but effectively it was still costing us an awful lot of money. But then in 2013, we switched into no tillage, and we were able to slash those costs of production down to £45 a hectare for depreciation and labour, wearing parts. It's the full cost, if you like. That doesn't include rolling cover crops and things like that, but this is to get a crop established. So this makes some huge savings in terms of where we can take our reduced costs of production, really. But it has so many other benefits as well. This was on some of our heavy land the year we started, and there was a great expression I picked up in America. I picked up a few, but one of them is "don't farm naked." So you want to keep your soil covered at all time to protect it. So here we have a residue of chopped oilseed rape stubbles and plants and pods. And we're planting cover crop in here between the oilseed rape that we've harvested and before we plant winter wheat. And our overall diesel use has fallen dramatically from this switch, which has resulted in nearly a 50% reduction of our carbon dioxide emissions just from planting alone. We've gone down from about 52 litres a hectare to establish a crop of wheat, down to 17. We're probably actually a little bit less than that now when I did it. But the benefits of this, keeping the soil covered, is also really important because it keeps it cooler in the summer. It means we're not interfering with the root structures, we're not interfering with the worms, so that they can continue to breed and multiply with food. It's important to keep them fed. And they're doing so much more drainage for us, so much more water infiltration. It's also saving us quite a lot of time. It used to take us about 56 minutes to establish a hectare of wheat. We've now got that down to about 18 minutes. So this has freed up time and labour and machinery to be able to expand our business. And we took on a 250 hectare farm next door on a contract farming agreement for their arable land. So we're able to spread our fixed costs that little bit further and that little bit wider. So keeping the soil covered, again, is really important. You may well have seen this sort of picture on Twitter and things like that before, but having a growing crop on a field is so important, from capturing carbon dioxide and pushing that out into the roots through root exudates, feeding the microbiology that's in the soil, which then holds that soil together, gives it structure, and retains its ability to not be eroded. We've got some quite steep slopes on the farm, and when we were cultivating, we did used to have erosion, and I'm thankful that we have eliminated that altogether now. It's also capturing a lot more moisture as well, rather than burning that moisture off, which again is enabling us to plant when perhaps some of our neighbours aren't, when we have a bit more moisture around. So yeah, cover cropping, really, really important. And oh, we've just gone a bit too far. Here we go. Has so many benefits. I call it the bit of a Swiss Army knife for our farming system. I'm not going to dwell on all of these benefits too much, but they are significant in terms of how we manage the farming system. We can't be direct drilling without living roots and having cover crops within that system, from a soil health point of view, from building soil organic matter, improving our soil health, and then the knock-on benefits that this has to the wider system. but it's quite an investment in our seeds and our diesel to get these cover crops established. So it is really, really important to try and make the most out of them. And I terminate it, or call this little section just the 5-minute fallow. And this to me is ideal. If we can have the drill in the same field as the combine, we're maximizing the day length. This was at the beginning of August, harvesting some winter wheat, some skyfall wheat. And at that time of year, the soil is warm, the days are long, and there's nearly always a little bit of moisture around to get a cover crop established the couple of days after harvest. So ideally, we want to be in the same field as the combine. It doesn't always work like that, but it's great if we can get to that. And it's also important that we can invest in our cover crops as well. People always ask me about, where does the return come from cover crops? And we'll come on to that in a minute. But if we've got cover crops that are going in after wheat and before spring barley, for instance, they're going to be in the ground for 6 months, maybe even a bit longer. So it's important there that we have an opportunity to invest in legumes, to try and fix nitrogen, to fix phosphate, or to extract phosphate out of the ground with things like buckwheat, oats and rye, to actually have big rooting systems to try and capture nutrients. So I'm not afraid to spend, sort of £40 a hectare on seed for this particular slot in the rotation. We're actually growing some cover crop seeds of our own to try and reduce the cost of this. And that also helps. We do a little bit of swapping as well with a couple of neighbours, which also helps to reduce the cost. And diversity is also really important for us. We've got all roots have got different attributes, whether they're to remove compaction or create tilth. So it's about this diversity of population and how they all react with different microbes in the soil. So important not to have a monoculture within the field if we can possibly help it. And as I say, timing is everything. Really important to be on the ball and get organised with the seed and everything else so that we can get going. So where does the value come back to this? This was a photograph that we took in the summer this year. We had some grass that we direct drilled spring peas into. This was for the vegetable market. The spring peas were hand harvested as little garden peas in their pods. And then we planted this cover crop mix on here. It's a 16-way cover crop mix, £75 a hectare. And this had maize and millet, sunflowers, some legumes in there. There was vetches, there was white clover, there was a bit of rye, a few oats, some stubble turnips, phacelia, buckwheat. So it was a really, really diverse mix. And it had a huge benefit in terms of what it had managed to capture and create in terms of nutrient value. So we had some analysed. We took some 1 metre squares and sent them off to be analysed, and we captured 270 kilos of nitrogen in that canopy. And the value I'd used at the time was £700 a cubic metre for nitrogen. So for a £75 investment of seed and drilling it, so I mean 110, 115 pounds a hectare, we'd captured and created over £500 worth of nitrogen, £45 worth of phosphorus, and £165 of potash. So that crop had captured an awful lot of nutrients. We're not sure when those nutrients will come back to the next crop, and this is the huge challenge we have. But what we're finding is that the longer we are going down this pathway, the faster the turnaround and the biological activity is for these nutrients to become available. I don't think I've got a slide to show it, but we did. Yes, I have. So ignore that question. So this is the cover crop, and then we have to be able to deal with being able to drill into it. So I hope this plays okay. So it's all very well creating these huge cover crops, but actually we still need the right farm machinery to be able to get our next crop established without having to go and top it or disc it in. Just to leave it on the surface like this is so important for weed suppression, protecting the soil. It carries the tractor really, really nicely. This was actually the year before, so the cover crop, it was the same mix actually, but it wasn't quite as forward. This was planting winter barley at the end of September. So really important to be able to deal with the cover crops that you're growing. And then this is the field just before. So we do some soil mineral N sampling to actually have a look at the soil reserve in the field itself. And after 3 years of grass, a pea crop, that cover crop, and then this winter wheat, we have 175 kilos of nitrogen in the soil. We have another 15 kilos within the crop. And then the AAN, which is the potentially available nitrogen, which is a calculation based on the biological activity of the soil, of another 58 kilos of N through the growing season. And that's very difficult to quantify in the field because it's very much dependent on moisture and temperature and the biological activity. Excuse me. But effectively, we've got nearly 250 kilograms of nitrogen available to that crop, which should mean, in theory, I don't need to put any artificial nitrogen on it at all. So we shall see how brave I am later on in the season. But this field has been on YouTube, and I'll continue to post on it as well. So you will be able to see how that develops. And we're going to leave a 0N plot in that field so that we can see exactly what yield we get without any artificial nitrogen on that, to see how accurate this is. And then going back to the sort of the rooting side of things, just a little example here. We've got some fodder radishes and we've got some sunflowers, and then also just chopped straw as well. Even if you don't want to do cover cropping, if you can chop straw and create that insulated layer, there's about a 10-degree difference between covered straw and uncovered straw, uncovered soil. In terms of covered soil will be cooler by about 10 degrees, which in the middle of summer is important because that maintains the biological activity. It doesn't send them off to sleep. And then you need to sort of kickstart them again a little bit later on in the season. And then we're also integrating a lot more and varied types of organic matter into the system. So we've got some brown organic matter with residue and manures. And then we've got some green, which is the cover crops and the livestock manure and the livestock dung. So it's effectively trying to feed a nice, balanced, healthy diet into our soil microbes, really. Are there any more questions, Frederic?
Yeah, we do actually have a few questions.
Okay.
How is the cover crop looking in spring before drilling spring barley?
So I'm not sure you got it, but the question relates around how the cover crops are looking in spring before spring crop establishment. So whether they are wintering or
Yeah, so we tend to destroy the cover crops with our sheep where we can. So at the moment they're grazing the land for spring barley now, and I'm aiming to graze about 50% of the biomass that's there, and then trample the other sort of 40% in, leaving sort of, well, no, probably a bit less than that. Trample 30% in, leaving 20% on the surface, which we will spray with glyphosate before we drill. Or sometimes we spray afterwards, depending on when we want to drill and how windy it is. But I'm very keen on leaving cover crops growing for as long as we possibly can. especially in the springtime, because they can suck up quite a lot of moisture very quickly, especially on a few nice warm days. I think it primes the microbes, it gets the microbial activity going, so that when we plant spring barley or peas into these fields, we've got some activity already there.
Thank you. We have a second question, I think.
Ja, jeg vil bare lige høre om, hvordan han sammensætter hans efterafgrøde.
So, Jake, the second question revolves around how you are making your cover crop mixtures. What are your thoughts on what proportions of seed to include in the mixture, and which species do you want to include, or which species you don't want to include in a cover crop mixture?
Yeah, really good question, and it does vary depending on where you are in the rotation. For me, we want to have a minimum of 5 species in there. So a brassica, a legume, a couple of cereals, maybe a phacelia and a buckwheat in there as well, because of this diversity and this this mixed population. So, you know, even in front of beans, for instance, so after wheat and before beans, I would include a legume in that section. So it'd be a vetch, an oat mix, because to me, I want to stimulate that soil biology with a legume to try and prime those bacteria, so that when I plant my bean into there, there's a population already started in terms of root colonization and starting off the nitrogen fixing process. We can get nodules on beans, you know, in 6 to 8 weeks in the autumn, which is quite quick based on some of our historic sort of observations. So I think if I was, you know, you've got to be a bit careful. If you were going into spring oats, for instance, I probably wouldn't have a cover crop dominated with oats in the preceding cover crop, because of sort of an insect virus and things like that. So there's a little bit of you know, looking at where you sit within the rotation. The other thing to think about is if you've got 5 species in there or more, not one of those is going to be dominant. So if you have got some pathogens in the soil that might affect the next crop, the fact that that cover crop element is being diluted by 80% of another species or different species, then it means they can't really get established. We're also going into a winter period where soil is becoming cooler and wetter, so the prolificacy of those soil pathogens is probably going to be less than planting something in the middle of the summer when those populations could really take off. So yeah, for me, lots of diversity.
Well, thank you very much. I think you can continue.
Okay. So rotation, this is a very quick section really, because we have tried to mix up the rotation. We've always had a sensible rotation on the farm here. Some of our neighbours, you know, 10-15 years ago were growing oilseed rape and wheat sort of back to back really, which wasn't sustainable. We have resistance of blackgrass, and yields were falling away. So for us, these are all pictures on the farm here. Oilseed rape is a crucial break crop to us. We have had a few issues with cabbage stem flea beetle in the past, but we are successfully, touch wood, being able to grow the crop now without any insecticides, and have done for about the last 4 years. What amazes me is that across the globe, we only focus on 3 main crop types, wheat, maize and rice, which make up 60% of our diets. And there are over 30,000 edible plant species. So we are only focused on a very small element of the type of crops that we can grow. So it would be nice to try and expand that a little bit more. But within the rotation now, we've got the grass crops, as in cereals and barley. We've also introduced some grass lays, some herbal rich lays, which we're going to be grazing with the sheep. We have linseed, and we have some legumes as well, peas and beans, which are important from a soil health point of view as well. I think rotation also spreads the risk in terms of the climate. So we have got, if we get hit with bad weather at a certain time, then hopefully it won't be a large proportion of the crops that get adversely affected. And this is the same for harvesting and for drilling as well. It's a bit more of a risk management strategy as well. The challenge is to get some of these smaller crops to contribute a good profitability. Wheat and oilseed rape, spring barley, very profitable. Beans this year have been profitable. Linseed hasn't, and the handpicked peas are. But it's it can be a bit of a challenge. And then the last element of the integration is our livestock. So where do we fit those in around the arable system? And this is the bit that I find absolutely fascinating about how we can include our sheep onto our fields more and more. So our livestock, we've got about 900 ewes. They are North Country mules, and also Romney Cross Aberfields, which are the ones on the picture here. They're grazing just over 300 hectares of permanent grass. We've got 60 hectares of herbal lays. They're spending the winter on cover crops, so resting the grass fields ready for lambing in the beginning of April. And then we're also planting turnips, stubble turnips, and we put some vetch in there as well to try and again and to break up the monoculture of just having brassicas in there. And then this is the clover understory, this picture, which is something that's very, very new. We've only just started doing it this year. We haven't combined a crop off it yet, but we'll see what happens. But a brief sort of history was that we had 3 fields of quinoa or quinoa, which failed because of the frosty weather in April. And I've been wanting to try this for a little while. So we bit the bullet and we planted some micro clover, which only grows about 15 centimeters tall before it flowers. And then that's as tall as the crop grows. The idea there is to have a living mulch underneath the cereal crop that we've subsequently planted into this. But what that's given us is about 6 weeks of grazing for 350 sheep through the end of August, September, and the beginning of October, just at the right time of year for these sheep to want to put on body condition, improve their fertility, and hopefully improve their lambing percentages. So we grazed the sheep across this field, and then a little while later on, at the beginning of October, we actually drilled it with a wheat variety. We're actually growing this for seed on these fields. So I hope the seed multiplication company are going to be happy with the fields that they've been grown in. I'm sure they will. And we just direct drilled straight into that clover once it had been grazed off. We did give it 1.5 litres of glyphosate just to control some grass weeds, but that didn't affect the clover at all. And the nitrogen, again, going back to our soil mineral N testing, we've got significant nitrogen levels stored up in these fields now, approaching again, not quite the 250 that we had before, but around the 200 kilo mark. This will enable us to reduce our chemical bill as well by reducing fungicides, reducing growth regulation, reducing herbicides, using this to compete with weeds. And ultimately that will improve both our soil health. It will improve our carbon footprint because, again, we'll probably only put 100 kilos of nitrogen on here at the most, which is about half of what it would normally have had. And to me, the other benefit of this is that we have now established a cover crop, which I hope we'll be able to keep in those fields for the length of the rotation. So I won't be spending, sort of 30 or 40 pounds a hectare every couple of years on cover crop seed. this investment has been made. It was just over £100 a hectare, so it was quite a significant cost. But if I can keep that in there and over the ewe production, you know, increase the lambing percentages, not by very much, we should be able to easily recoup the cost of the seed. And it'll be fascinating to see how this yields based on the reduced input program and what that can do for our climate resilience, which is so important in terms of water infiltration, compaction removal, and nitrogen fixation. And if nitrogen is going to be, well, A, very expensive, but B, you know, are we actually going to be able to get any? A system like this might just command quite a premium going forward in terms of the resilience to other market factors that are way out of our control. So we'll see how we get on. I've got more quinoa going in the ground this year, and we're going to undersow that quinoa with more clover. So I've got another block of this happening to see if we can try and increase the amount of these small leaf clovers around the farm to really go for this sort of lower input, but hopefully not too penalised output system. But we shall see how we get on. And then this is the other thing I've been looking at this year, and I've been trying to do it for a year or two. This is right up on the top of the hill. Excuse me. So we are about sort of 250 meters up. This was very similar to the cover crop field. So this was grass for 3 years. Then it had peas and a big cover crop on it, and then some winter wheat. You can still see the residue of the cover crop in the photograph there. And we have been grazing this with some bought-in sheep or borrowed sheep, actually. We don't have enough of our own at the moment. So we've got 350 ewe lambs from a neighbouring farm, grazing in 3.5 hectare blocks. It's keeping them busy for about 5 or 6 days. These sheep have improved no end from coming onto the farm here. They have clean grazing. They're recycling the nutrients around and adding biology to the fields. It's also adding a very small income stream to the farm from the sheep keep income as well. So this is benefiting both sides of the equation, both the arable and the sheep. And this is what it looks like. So this is the field that had the that big cover crop on it that we analysed with 250 kilos, 248 kilos of N in the soil. This was 4 days after the sheep had come off, and the wheat had responded by growing about 1 inch already. We'd grazed off an awful lot of dead and diseased leaves with septoria. We now have active roots in there. We have, say, reduced disease pressure. So can we cut our fungicides back even further? I'm not anticipating any need for plant growth regulation. I'm not sure about the reduced weeds yet. We'll have to see how it sort of develops over the season. But I've been really, really impressed with how this wheat looks after the sheep have been over it. And you can see a lot of the residue there. This is residue from a lot of the sunflowers and the maize. High lignin crops, which is important, I think, in terms of how we balance that nutrient release back to the next crop. So again, coming back to diversity, having these C4 plants in that cover crop is really, really important. And then we're also doing quite a lot of companion cropping as well with our oilseed rape. Have been doing this now since 2015, I think it is. As a result of another Nuffield scholar, a friend of mine, Andy Howard. And if you want to read his report, if you just Google that, Andy Howard in Nuffield, you'll be able to see his report on there. And this, I think, has revolutionized how we are able to still grow oilseed rape on the farm here, whereas a lot of our neighbors have stopped growing it now because of cabbage stem flea beetle. So it's all planted at the same time as the oilseed rape. We plant 12.5 kilos per hectare of vetches, of buckwheat, phacelia and Berseem clover. And that goes in terms of nitrogen fixing. We think there's probably 30 to 50 kilos of extra nitrogen that's available through the legumes. That's very much dependent on the growing season. It also helps mask the crop from pigeons. and also from cabbage stem flea beetle when they start to migrate at the end of August. We've cut back on herbicide, so it's not having a pre-emergence herbicide now. We do still give it a product called AstroCurb, which takes out the black grass, any grass weeds, and it also does sort of mayweeds and thistles and things like that as well. And that takes out all the rest of the companion cropping now. So as we look at it now, it looks like sort of a conventional oilseed rape. We have a much higher root mass where we have companion cropping just because of the population of plants, all burrowing down, all creating channels, all feeding earthworms and the microbial life. So for me, that's been a real game changer in terms of getting oilseed rape to grow, because it does add significant profit into the crop rotation. And I just wanted to show you this. This is some of our financial performance based on the benchmarking that we do with the AHDB. We've just, funnily enough, we've just had the Harvest 21 benchmarking meeting this morning. So I need to go through and update this spreadsheet again with this next year's crop on it. Harvest 2020 was a bit of a disaster for barley, I'll be honest. But it just goes to show that this farming system can still be very, very, very profitable. We have consistently been the highest, not just gross margin, but more importantly, the net margin, which is the next page, in our benchmarking group from our locality there. 10 minutes, perfect. Yeah, that's spot on, Frederick. This to me is really important, that our output isn't really being inflicted by the change in farming practice, and we're making considerable savings in our labour and machinery profile as well. For instance, we have saved £270,000 worth of capital that we're not reinvesting in cultivation equipment. Our tractor horsepower fleet has gone down by one big tractor, saving us 280 horsepower. Our fuel usage is very much reduced across the overall farm, all adding to the bottom line, as well as helping us with our carbon footprint. So we do a lot of tissue testing, we do a lot of soil analysis, and these are some results that we do at the same time with soil mineral N testing. I get some loss of ignition soil organic matter tests done. Ooh, a capital M I need to put on there. And this is 3 different fields, 3 different soil types. So Spires North, the blue line is our sandy fields. The red is our heavy field, and the green is, or heavy fields, and the green is the top of the hill at Kemerton Larches. And what we found is that over that period of time, our loss on ignition has gone up by 1.7% organic matter, which is 0.2% per year, which I'm really thrilled about, because there's a lot of discussion in the UK here about how we should measure our soil carbon. Is loss of ignition the right test, or is DUMAS the right test, or potassium permanganate? How should we test? But we've been using the same laboratory, using the same technique for all of these years. So even if the numbers are incorrect, the trend is right. And for me, that's really important. And it demonstrates that we are able to improve the carbon levels in our soil, which means that carbon is coming out of the atmosphere. So the future, where do we need to go? This is the drill we just saw drilling in that cover crop. So to me, we need to have more C4s, more carbon capturing crops within our cover crops, and I've got plans to be able to do that this year. We need more biology, whether that's through organic manures, whether that's through brewed up populations that we can put in with the drill on the front tank there. We need to be doing less chemicals, and I include fertilizer in that system as well, and enterprise stacking as well. Can we try and use these fields multiple times over the course of a year? And another one I'm very, very keen on is agroforestry, from a carbon capturing point of view, from a biodiversity point of view, creating rows of trees with meadow grassy strips underneath them, and the combine widths in between sort of 36 meters, so it won't impinge too much on our efficiency of production within the arable fields. To me, this sums up fantastically how our farming system needs to work. This was a picture I took on a bean and oat cover crop. It's actually a little video, and it's quite gruesome watching this ladybird tuck into an aphid, but it's actually quite satisfying as well. And this is where we need to be with integrated pest management. You know, we need more ladybirds, and we can also have a look at more income streams as well. This is a project we're quite heavily involved with natural capital markets and Trinity AgTech, looking at our carbon calculator, our carbon footprint, and can we capture and analyze and calculate our carbon, get it verified, and have a certificate that we can actually sell to people looking to offset their carbon on our farms. And I think this is a really huge growth area over the next few years for agriculture, especially if we're farming more regeneratively, we're capturing more soil, capturing more carbon in our soils. Therefore, we should have more to be able to sell. With the carbon comes biodiversity. And again, I think this is part of the interest with reconnecting into our customers. Biodiversity is really important. We're a very small island here. We have a very low biodiversity score. We have a lot of people, and those two don't always go hand in hand. But we also have an opportunity farming this way by not using insecticides, less fungicides, less fertilizer. We have more insects in our fields, and as a result of that, we have more farmland birds in our hedgerows. We've been monitoring them and ringing them and weighing them, measuring them, and letting them go again for this last 12 months with the West Midland bird ringers. And we're finding on the no-till farms, the regen farms, the bird populations are increasing rapidly, where we have food sources and shelter and habitat around all year, which is really important. I don't know whether you guys get the same farmland birds. You do, yeah, over with you. So we might have a quiz later on to see if you can identify those four. But this is also really important to me. So this is my daughter, Georgia, who comes out bird ringing. And this is the next generation. This is the generation we need to inspire to want to produce food, not necessarily her, she can do what she likes, but it's that concept of the next lot of farmers are farming in a responsible way. This is the tally, if you like, from the birds that we rung this year, with red and orange red list species, or the red ones, so they're the real rare ones, with just over 1,000 birds rung in the 12 months, which is really, really important. And it's good to get a baseline in terms of where our biodiversity sits. And then we're also looking to set up our own company. This is the Green Farm Collective, to have a look at how we can trade that biodiversity and that carbon. And to us, it's about keeping that local. So, you know, if people want to offset their carbon, their biodiversity, yes, it's great and very important to offset it in Madagascar or the Amazon, but actually, why don't they invest in our local rural economy, offset their carbon on our farms, and sponsor biodiversity in our farmland that they can look at and appreciate and get a value from, as well as just a financial reward for us. So we're working really hard, just setting this business up, trying to get it going, with 5 other direct drill, no-till farmers who, Frederick, you'll probably recognise everybody on there. Tim Parton, Simon Cowell, Angus Gowthorpe, myself, Richard, Michael Kavanagh. So we're very passionate about getting this all off the ground. And then finally, just a last slide or two. Where do we need to be? We need to keep looking at nitrogen from a cost point of view, from an environmental point of view. We need to keep looking at biological inputs. So we've got some Johnson Sues on the go at the moment, trying to brew our own biology. more and more organic applications going to be important. Very difficult at the moment with farming rules for water, where they're limiting us quite significantly on application windows. And we need more and different livestock. So we're actually looking at a beef enterprise on the farm here to complement the sheep. Change in landscape use as well, so agroforestry, which we've spoken about before, and then carbon and biodiversity opportunities, which again we've just mentioned. I just want to finish on this very last slide, and this is a Sanskrit text, which is an Indian text from 15,000 years BC, and it's upon this handful of soil our survival depends. Husband it and it will grow our food, our fuel and our shelter, and surround us with beauty. Abuse it and the soil will collapse and die, taking humanity with it. So that's another good vision from a long time ago.
Well, thank you very much, Jake. What an amazing lot of info you have for us. I'm sure that there's plenty of questions from the audience. Så har vi nogle spørgsmål til Jake. Der må være nogle spørgsmål til alt, hvad vi har hørt. Ja, jeg tror bare, måske vi tager 2 spørgsmål ad gangen, og så nå på det. Ja, det var altså lidt om, han har ærter og vækker og sammen, og så står han heste begynder ud. Han er ikke bange for, at det giver noget sygdom, men det er lige meget, når han vækster så meget, som han gør. Og der skal vi andre ikke være bange for, at så er der bagefter, når vi gør det sammen.
So, Jake, the question revolves around if you are is soil-borne diseases from your cover crop mixtures, if you are having any concerns about having veggies in the cover crop and then planting a bean afterwards for the rotational soil-borne diseases?
Yeah, no, I have no hesitation at all about doing that. We plant about 20 kilograms a hectare of vetches, with about 50 to 75 kilograms of rye or oats before our beans get planted. And to me, that it doesn't cause a problem. In fact, I think it aids and helps the population of bacteria in the soil, the nitrogen fixing bacteria get established before the beans get planted. They're only in the ground for a relatively short period of time, so I don't tend to worry about a build-up of soil-borne diseases. To the extent where we're not using seed dressings in winter wheat, winter barley or beans now, we're just planting them with the manganese and zinc seed dressings, no fungicide dressings at all anymore on those. And we want to create fungi in the soil. So to me, it seems a bit crazy to put a fungicide on the seed in the soil. So we have stopped doing that now with no problems.
Well, thank you.
Næste spørgsmål. Ja.
Is about the reduction of your fertilizer. We're talking about nitrogen fertilizer. What is your experience? At what pace can you do the cutbacks, and do you include foliar sprays of urea in your attempt to cut back?
So in terms of our nitrogen reductions, I think that was the question. So winter wheat, so a milling wheat crop, historically, before we were farming this way, we would put 280 kilograms of nitrogen on. Now we're about 200 for milling wheats and about 170 for a feed wheat. And we've brought that down, sort of 10% per year at the moment. And We'll come back a little bit more this year, again, because of the price. Spring barley, we used to be 140, 150 kilograms of nitrogen. Last year we were 85. We had good yields and good nitrogen levels in the grain. And I did 2 fields at 35 kilos of nitrogen, but all the fertilizer was sprayed on. So it was like an amide base, so like a urea that can go straight into the plant through the leaf rather than be soil applied. And we only gave that 35 kilos of N, and one of those fields was the highest yielding field that we did. So nitrogen fertilizer is maybe 60% efficient in the soil applied. So we're wasting a considerable amount. So by cutting it back and using some through the leaf is an important way of increasing our efficiencies.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question.
Hi, I am wondering if you are familiar with the systems where you move pigs around in movable pens, and if so, I'm especially wondering about the soil disturbance and the climate gases from the manure. So, well, is the system positive or mostly damaging?
Did you get that?
Was that about moving pigs around?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know too much about that, but to me it makes sense to move animals quite a lot in terms of very short intensive grazing periods, and I would imagine that might be the same with pigs because of they root around quite a lot and they disturb it. I saw some work in New Zealand where they had quite a lot of poaching from cattle on some cover crops and kale that they were grazing, and it looked horrible. It looked really poached. But because the fields had been no-till for sort of 20 years, they just direct drilled straight into that with absolutely no problems at all. So I think that the longer you can stay in the system or have been in the system, then the more flexibility that it will enable you to have. But I don't know whether that's answered the question, but it's yeah, I don't have too much experience with pigs.
Yeah, I think it's sufficient. We have the last few questions approaching.
Do you have any challenges with slugs?
So do you have any slug issues?
Yeah, we have slugs. We've always had slugs. We were getting less slugs until probably the very wet winter of 2019 and 2020, and then the population then increased again. We still don't have a need for slug pellets in the spring. But we do use slug pellets to establish oilseed rape and after oilseed rape going into wheat. But they might only have one dose of 5 kilograms a hectare of slug pellets. Metaldehyde has gone now, so we're on to sort of ferric sulfate, or ferric phosphate. But we are seeing an awful lot more beetles that are around on the farm now. So we see carabid beetles, and we also see rove beetles, which are predators of slugs and slug eggs. So those numbers, you know, when we cultivated, I never saw those beetles, but now we can find them, you know, under every rock, which is good. So we still need to, but we're not using as many as we used to when we were doing full tillage.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Jake, first question. Okay, we have run out of time, so I'll just speak you off.
So Jay, thank you very much for your presentation. I think I'm speaking on behalf of everybody that we are most delighted that you have the available time to speak to us today. And I think, well, at least I've got a lot of impressions and stuff to work with, I hope. And I'm pretty sure that I see a lot of nudges around and people are definitely agreeing. So yes, thank you very much. I think we will just give you another cheers.
Thank you.